Hey y'all, it's me, Dree. So before I get into this next part of my Reckoning series, I just want to stop and say something very clearly. I'm sure you've noticed it's been about 6 months since I've worked on this series, and the reason for that is because after recording the last video, which I believe was part 10, I hit a wall, and it was a real one. You see, once I started getting deeper into all these parts of my story, I started realizing how much of my reality that I hadn't actually processed yet. So, since the last time I spoke on my life and the things that I've gone through, since then I've uncovered a lot of truth, a lot of clarity, and a lot of things that I just wasn't able to see way back then. I mean, guys, it's taken me 6 years for the clarity and the truth of my whole situation to finally become clear to me. And that is a very big thing. But for the sake of this series being cohesive, I'm not going to tell the next parts of my story from the clarity that I have now about it. I'm going to walk you through the next events exactly as I was experiencing it at that time. Not as what I know now that it was, but more as if I want you to just understand what it felt like while I was living through the reality. So we'll get into the full truth once the baseline of what actually happened has fully been established. So I think where we had left off, my kids were in California with my mom. It was May, and by the time June came, they were still gone. They, by this time, had started making extended trips to California to stay with my mom when she had to return to California to handle business and, get back to her home base. My girls would just travel with her. And when they were here in Texas, they would stay in the RV. So my reality at home, it was just mostly me and my husband. And they were gone a long time, and I guess the starkest thing about it was that I knew why. They weren't leaving me because they wanted to. They were leaving because they needed to. They needed to escape what our home had become. And I missed my babies in a way that I don't think I'll ever be able to fully explain. They were my lifeline. They were the only connection I had left to something real. something grounded, and something that reminded me of the person that I was. But at this time, they were gone. And I was left home, sick, alone, and losing myself more and more with every single day. By this point, my husband, he was home to work. And if he wasn't working, he was either in the garage partying or he was out. In either case, he was always with friends. He was always somewhere that wasn't with me. And when he was in the house within these walls, when he was home, it didn't feel like home anymore. He had started telling me things that at the time I didn't know exactly how to process. He would just very matter-of-factly, he would announce to me that I wasn't a fan favorite anymore, that I had become socially awkward, and that other people were noticing it because our friends, they didn't want to be around me. When you're already sick, like really sick, and you're already isolated, and you're already questioning yourself completely, that kind of messaging from your husband, it doesn't just hurt. It starts to reshape your reality entirely. So when he pushed me out of his social dynamic, it was probably then that I stopped trying. I stayed in the guest room, and he lived an entirely separate life under the same roof. I craved connection. I craved being seen. I craved having someone just check in on me, asking if I was okay or making sure that I hadn't stopped breathing, but none of those things happened, not even once. And that little room in this house, it swallowed me completely. My days blurred together until it was my weeks blurring together. I was so sick. I was exhausted. I was almost done with treatment by this time, but I was trying to survive that entirely. It was wearing me down to nothing. And at the same time, I was spending every bit of extra energy that I had trying to make sense of what was happening around me. And the truth is, I didn't have clarity. I knew by now, I knew that things were bad. But even though I knew that, I couldn't fully see it. It felt like I was constantly chasing the truth. I was always trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't, because every time I got close to understanding something and feeling like I might be able to take my power back, he would come along and he would twist it, gaslight it, and then it was turned back on me. So, not only was I so sick, I'm also very confused. I'm questioning myself. I'm trying to understand how I became the problem in a situation I couldn't even recognize anymore. There was nobody that was seeing what I was seeing that could validate my reality, and it was me against him. My reality versus his reality. And because I saw him as my protector, I couldn't question his reality. I had to try to understand it because I was his wife, and it was my responsibility to help fix whatever it is that had gotten a hold of him. My reality, the walls around me, his words, his tone, his absence, it all started blending together. And I just want to say that when that happens, it's crazy because people talk about it, but it's not until you're in it that you really can understand that when all of these things are in play at one time, you stop understanding what's real. And that state that I was in, it didn't last for a moment. It lasted for months. From June all the way through summer, and then autumn, and then into October. That was my reality. And by the time October came, my mom was arriving back in Texas. My girls were back with her. And I just had a few more appointments left on the calendar until my treatment was going to be complete. So by this point, my husband, he was spending almost no time at home. Or, I mean, even when he was at home, he would go to the pond and fish at sun up and sun down. So it would be by the time I had to go to bed at 7 p.m., he was still on the dock fishing, and he hadn't even said hello to me for the day. And I had been waiting since I woke up in the morning, and this carried on day through night, through day, through night. It was a constant repeat, and my sense of self, that vanished. I was in the few minutes I would have with him, I felt like I was always begging for his time or his attention or anything that felt like a connection, and he was always responding as if I was the worst nag. And then one day he told me he was going golfing, which he did incessantly. If you guys have been following along, he's a big golfer. So by now I had very much become accustomed to golf days being the whole day, and that it was a no communication kind of day. So that day he said he would be home by a specific time because there was something that I was wanting him to do with me. It was a Sunday, I remember, and I don't know if it was a chore or something that needed to be handled because I was still managing the house during all of this. And anyways, the time came for him to be home, and it passed. He didn't show up. Hours went by. The day was starting to end. So I called his phone. No answer. And that day, at that point, I could feel myself clearly hitting a limit. And that evening, when he walked through the front door 5 hours late with no explanation and no accountability, that day I decided I was going to press him about it. He took me into the backyard because the girls were in the house that day, and I had been clear that we were not going to be fighting around them. So he shuffled me into the backyard, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He looked at me with so much boldness, so much disdain. And then he asked me who the hell I thought I was to question him. He told me he didn't answer to anyone. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, I don't even know who this person is, right? Like, that was not my husband. And me, I'm a firecracker. I have my own attitude underneath it all, which I guess parts of that were still there because that day when he told me that he doesn't answer to anyone, I talked right back. Because even though I was vulnerable, I could still feel that fight way down deep inside of me, and I had had enough. I don't remember what exactly I said to him, but I know that it was triggering, and before I even understood what was happening the next moment, everything escalated. He lunged at me. He had picked up one of those big, heavy 5-wick candle bowls. He was lunging at me, on top of me, digging the corner of that bowl into the ridge of my bald forehead with so much force. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't safe. And so I did the only thing I thought to do. It was a Sunday. We didn't have a lot of neighbors, but there was a huge echo in our neighborhood, and I screamed for help probably 3 times. And once I did that, he half pulled, half shoved, half drug me back into the house. And he called the girls to come sit on the stairway, which was overlooking him and I in the living room. And he shoved me onto the couch. He told me to apologize to him for disrespecting him, for questioning him, for asserting his time schedule. It was as if he was a king and I was a peasant, and that I had crossed him in the most severest of ways. And he shoved me on that couch, and I wasn't doing it anymore. So I stood back up, as tough as I could, as strong as I could. And as soon as I stood up, he knocked me back down. And that happened over and over and over again. I had counted 32 times that I hit the ground that evening. And my girls, they were watching. They were terrified. They believed during those moments that they were watching me lose my life. And so my youngest daughter gathered up every bit of courage she had. She snuck down the stairs and out the front door, and she ran to our next door neighbor. When he answered, she begged for help and asked him to call 911. She told him that her mom needed help. He brought that little girl inside, told her to calm down, gave her a cookie, and then he sent her back home. When she came back, defeated, nothing in this house had changed. I was still fighting him. I was still being thrown around. I was wearing a house dress that day. And every time that he knocked me over, my dress would rise further up until it was twisted around my shoulders, my whole bare back and ass and legs. Everything was exposed. I'm trying to keep my balance as I kept standing back up, only to be knocked back down without my clothes on all the way. And it was degrading. I had a bald head. My 6'4" husband was physically manhandling me. My oldest daughter saw that it wasn't stopping, so that's when she took action. She snuck into my office where she knew my iPad would be, and she texted out to the neighbors that were the closest to us, the same ones that I've talked to about before that seemed to love my husband so much, but they were not respecting me. So my daughter texted them. She said, "My mom is in trouble. Please call 911 and do not text back." And by the time she came back to the stairs, I had nothing left in me. I had fought that man as long as I could. And I knew the only way it was going to stop was if I gave in and gave him what he wanted. He told me to get on my knees. And I did. He told me what to say. And I listened. I apologized for everything. I had apologized for things that I wasn't even a part of, or I apologized for things that weren't mine to carry. But in that moment, I did it because I realized that my submitting to him meant my survival. I don't remember quite how the night settled down, but I know once that altercation was over, I went back to the guest room. I had been prescribed Xanax for all the stress that I had been going through. It had been increased when I got diagnosed with cancer, because with my mental illness that I was treating along with the cancer, my doctor thought it was reasonable that I take 4 Xanax a day. That night, after what happened, I took 12. I couldn't be awake in that reality anymore. And as soon as I took them was as soon as that became my new pattern. I had picked back up my drinking, and I was doing that mostly all day to get through the day. And then I would use the Xanax at night to escape my reality. But the day after this altercation, I woke up and my body told the whole story. I was covered in bruises. my arms, my chest. My port was here where this butterfly was, and even that port that they were using to do my cancer treatments, even that was black and blue. My arms hurt. All my muscles hurt. I felt like I had been hit by a truck. And so I was sitting in the garage most of that next day. I had also picked back up smoking because when I was diagnosed with cancer, I wanted to quit smoking right away, and my husband said that he wasn't ready to do that, and so I would have to take on that venture by myself. And I admit that our relationship had become codependent, and I wasn't in a place that I felt strong enough to stop the habits that he was doing, because in a way, those habits were the only way that I could connect with him. So I was sitting in the garage the next day, smoking cigarettes and drinking Captain Morgan's with Dr. Pepper, and I was just trying to exist quietly without anybody taking notice. And that's when the neighbor showed up. The neighbor, my daughter, had texted the night before for help. He looked at me when he was walking up to the front door. He saw me clearly. He said, "I'm here for John," and walked past me like I was a nobody. And in that moment, I felt something settle in me without fully understanding what it was, because I was being hurt in my own home, and every person around me who could possibly save me and help me, every single person had chosen him. So that week, I didn't go to chemo. Not because I didn't want to fight, but I didn't go because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. He was the one making the money now, and he was reminding me of that every chance he got. And by that point, everything in me was bracing for survival. I couldn't challenge him. I learned that. I couldn't create more conflicts. I couldn't risk losing the very little stability I thought still existed in my environment. And at that very same time, I was still holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. That man who had shown up for 8 years, the man I thought I knew so deeply and entirely, I couldn't reconcile that he was gone. So I stayed. I adjusted. I just tried to stay out of his way and not be a problem. And I made every single decision based on what I needed to do to survive him. None of my decisions were about protecting myself. My kids were staying in the RV on most nights. So, my duty to them, I held. But this is where I was. Not clear. Not aware. Not wiped out. Just trying to survive inside something that was breaking me from every single direction, all at the same time. And I just want to say, if you've never been in something like what I'm explaining, it's hard to understand why a person doesn't just leave. But when your reality has been reshaped slowly, when your sense of self has been worn down over time, and when you have a life-threatening sickness on top of isolation, on top of dependency, when you're in that position, you don't see an exit. You see survival. And you make your decisions based on what will keep the peace, what will keep you safe, and what will get you through the next moment. And keep you alive. And that's exactly where I was inside of my reality. I was still holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I was still trying to make sense of something that it just didn't make sense. And I was still there believing that if I could adjust things just enough, that it would somehow go back to what it was. But it didn't. And I didn't walk away from that whole event with clarity. I didn't walk away from it stronger. I didn't walk away from it changed. What I did, I stayed. I stayed in it. And I kept trying to survive it without fully understanding what exactly I was inside of. And that's where the next part of my story will continue. I think this story is important. I didn't know that it was as important as it was when I started sharing it. But like I said, over the last 6 months, I've found a lot of clarity. A lot of real life realities have come into play. And now that they have, this story is so much more important than I ever imagined that it could be. So if you're following along, I want to say thank you. And I want to say that if what I have to say is resonating, that you are not alone. Because where there is love, there is light. And when times get dark, surrounding yourself in real love, it's so important. Especially when real life is on the line. So I'll catch you guys in part 12. And we'll pick up where we left off really, really soon.